Ladies and gentlemen, Lauren Boebert last Christmas shared a photo with her family exhibiting a sense of pride or admiration for the Second Amendment. Perhaps not the Christmas photo that I would have sent out, but a Christmas photo nonetheless that showed the world that her family is protected from a possible person like the one who was arrested by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and by local law enforcement in Florida, sending absolutely despicable messages to her and just, promising the unthinkable within those messages. Obvious criminal activity. I believe it was 5 felony counts, something along those lines. I talked about that in the segment today on this channel. H.A. Goodman of almost 200,000 subs. Hit subscribe to this channel. And also I have a segment on the stock market crash channel right before this one. Check it out. And I'll have a segment on the Bitcoin crash to 10,000 or lower channel right after this segment. So please check those out and subscribe to those YouTube channels. They're below in the description and the pinned comment. The interesting thing, ladies and gentlemen, is that Democrats don't understand a basic principle of life, like basic logic. If you have people out there that are potentially out of their minds, that want to commit evil, that want to do just the unimaginable, the unspeakable, the most monstrous criminal act, they want to engage in the most monstrous criminal activity, they are not going to follow legislation. So when Eric Swalwell, for example, is in Congress saying, oh, you're on the side of the criminal because you don't want legislation curbing the Second Amendment, it's like, no, you don't understand. It's people like Eric Swalwell or the Democrats in Congress who literally are the defenders or the marketing they're the marketing agency for these absolute lunatics who have not only lost their mind, but they want to inflict as much damage to humanity and to the most innocent among us as possible. Democrats don't ask, why is this happening? How do we stop that individual? Because that individual is the epitome of everything wrong in the world and society and human beings. That individual is not going to say, oh, you banned this. Okay. Gee, I'm going to stop what I'm going to do now. I'm not going to inflict as much damage and carnage as possible because Eric Swalwell or Nancy Pelosi or Democrats prevented me from getting this inanimate object, so maybe I won't get another inanimate object or engage in another course of action. Speaking in roundabout terms for YouTube guidelines and policies. These people go into those places with armor because they're cowards and they don't want to lose their lives. The only deterrent is if they know if they're going to engage in a course of action that their life will be lost before they can harm anyone else. That's the only way. The only way to protect Lauren Boebert or you or me or anyone or AOC or any Democrat or Eric Swalwell, if God forbid there's somebody like the man that went after Lauren Boebert. God forbid. He needs to protect himself utilizing the Second Amendment. I was told by police when I had the same type, similar type, not exactly with the same words, but a similar type of Twitter interaction, I was told by police, oh, arm yourself. That basically, you know what to do and arm yourself. Because the police officer told me there's not much we can do. Aside from, I filed a police report on the Twitter profile. But Democrats are so clueless and they live in this fantasy world where if you just enact legislation, that means the despicable, mindless criminal will abide by the legislation. Most of the violence attributed to the Second Amendment or firearms are done with illegally obtained. They're all illegally obtained most of the time. And if you want to make a certain age limit, then make a certain age limit for sending Americans overseas. The same Democrats who say, 18 is too young. Well, that's possible. Well, that's an issue that could be a discussion. But if 18 is too young at home, it should be too young to send Americans overseas as well, utilizing much greater, infinitely greater weaponry. So Democrats have zero problem with the Lincoln Project sending Americans off overseas at 18. But now it's a problem because you have maniacs who should have been stopped immediately. And that's why you empower schools or hospitals or synagogues, places of worship. You empower those places to defend themselves. Notice how Democrats in Congress have security details where they spend tens of thousands of dollars, in some cases hundreds of thousands a year. You cannot stop. So Lauren Boebert sending that Christmas card was a message. Yeah, she needs the Federal Bureau of Investigation to protect her, like everyone, like they protect Democrats even more so. Yeah, you need law enforcement. But you can't wait, and you need to protect yourself in the event that law enforcement doesn't come as soon as they can or as soon as possible. And so this is a very simple, the average Democrat lives in a fantasy world where as long as there are laws, criminals won't break them. And as long as you ban this, then there won't be violence, because as you know, it's this and then the word violence. It's a euphemism, because if you just remove the first word of that phrase, well, then there's no problem then. Except there is a problem, because in other countries you have a similar loss of life, but they use different inanimate objects. You're not going to ban evil. Democrats have no concept of what that is, even though some of them embody that to varying degrees, obviously not to the extent of the complete lunatics we see in the news today. But if you want to protect the most innocent among us, then you protect them. And you don't just rely on legislation. Legislation doesn't protect anybody. You couldn't ban alcohol. We couldn't even ban alcohol. We couldn't even, the prohibition, it didn't work. You had politicians in New York and Chicago in on it and breaking the Volstead Act. You had politicians, you had law enforcement, you had everyone who was supposed to uphold the Volstead Act and prohibition. They were also engaging in having a good time in speakeasies. Okay? It didn't work. You have a war on narcotics. That's not working. You can obtain any inanimate object you want, unfortunately, in this world. And you're not going to make it difficult for the madman, because he's already lost his mind and wants to commit as much atrocity as possible. You're going to make it difficult for the law-abiding citizen who has to abide by laws, because guess what? They're not criminals, and Democrats have no understanding of what a criminal is. A criminal doesn't care about your legislation. A mindless, not just, a person who is intent on being viewed as the most diabolical human who's ever lived doesn't care about legislation. So you can pontificate and utilize tragedy to further a political goal, or you can protect people. Protecting human beings and young people and the most innocent angels among us, the only way you can do that is by ensuring that, in God forbid, a moment where somebody tries to begin a rampage, the second they try to begin it is the last second they're on this earth. And Democrats say, oh, well, that's not even possible. Oh, And it's like, well, you're waiting. You would want these innocents to wait for an hour or so. You would want them to wait until law enforcement come, or 20 minutes or 10 minutes. You should empower people who are in charge of protecting the most innocent among us. And if those people don't want to, then you hire people who are trained and who can protect at that moment. See, you need reciprocal force at that moment. At that moment, reciprocal force. You have somebody intent on doing as much damage to innocent people, and that person should experience as much damage as possible at that very moment to stop the individual. It's not a difficult concept. It's very difficult for Democrats because they live in a world where it's a fantasy world. They don't live in the real world where nothing bad can happen because laws protect them. And if you ban this, everything will be fine. Except if you ban something, criminals find ways to obtain them, and law-abiding citizens can't defend themselves. So Lauren Boebert, God bless her and her family. You know, I did what the police told me, armed myself, and I'm always thinking like, okay, you know what? We live in a dangerous world. At least I live in a country where the Second Amendment empowers me to protect myself. Democrats don't see that. They see the inanimate object, and it's actually a living thing to them. They care more about, they are angrier at Ted Cruz than the actual person who commits those crimes. And that's a very twisted, like when I was watching Eric Swalwell on a clip, and he's like, oh, you are on the side of the criminals. It's like, no, actually you are. You're emboldening them and allowing them to get away with pretty much everything by not ensuring that potential victims are now people who could be heroes and defenders instead of victims. Democrats turn citizens who could defend themselves into victims by not allowing them to defend themselves. And at that moment, when a criminal comes into your life, God forbid, you're not going to say vote blue no matter who. You're going to try to protect yourself by any means necessary. And it's Democrats who want to limit those means. Give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe to this channel. Go to the stock market crash channel right now, and then the Bitcoin crash to 10,000 or below. God bless Lauren Boebert, and she's 100% right in terms of sending out that. It's not a Christmas photo that I would have sent out, but it's a message that I think it's very important that she sent out. Thank you.